going to be that national insurance reduction, so it's unlikely, I would say, that there's going to be any changes when it comes to income tax. Well, joining me now is Holly Mackay, the founder and CEO of Boring Money, as well as Joanne Romaniuk from Paynton, who says she's struggling to make ends meet. I'm also joined by Matthew McKenzie from London, who is a working carer. And the purpose of this discussion is to actually talk to people about how this budget may impact them. So, Matthew, let's speak to you first. Hi, Matthew. Thanks for joining us here on BBC News. Just tell us, first of all, about your personal situation and what you are hoping to get out of this budget.
Well, my personal situation, as what you've mentioned, is I'm a working carer. So, I try my best to go out and contribute to society. I want to work. I don't want to be too reliant on the state. So I've got my brother here, Jay. He might seem a bit quiet, but he can't speak, so I have to advocate and support him. I do get support, but what I really hope for this budget is support for himself with universal credit and anything that could make me want to stay in work. So that's really what I want out of the budget, to be honest.
Okay, well, I've got Holly Mackay from Boring Money, although money is anything but boring at the moment. Can you tell us about, you've looked at Matthew's case and you've crunched some numbers. Tell us what your take is on what Matthew could get out of this budget.
Well, I think for Matthew, there's not going to be cause for excessive whoops of joy out of today's budget. The fact is that the Treasury cupboards, I'm afraid, are pretty bare. Now, we do know there's already been announced an increase in the amount of universal credit that Matthew's brother will get. So from the 8th of April, that will go up by about £25 a week. The best thing Matthew could hope for would be an increase in the personal allowance he gets in income tax. Now, that sounds a bit dry and academic, but that's set at £12,570. If that were to go up, then Matthew's earnings that he wouldn't be taxed on could also go up. So the thing we'll be looking out for, is there any sort of hope that the Chancellor will increase that personal allowance? If not, then Matthew will stand to benefit from cuts in national insurance, but as a lower earner, they'll be limited. So there's that increase in universal credit. He'll get a bit more in take-home pay from the cuts in national insurance. But other than that, I'm not hoping for much.
Just for our viewers, you talk about the threshold and the allowance. What's the difference between that then? You talk about personal allowance, and then we've been talking about tax thresholds as well.
It's the personal allowance is that first threshold. So everyone who earns a wage in the UK can earn £12,570 and not pay a penny of income tax on that money. So the problem for us is when inflation starts to push our wages up and we're earning more than that we start to pay income tax. So the thing we all hope for is that threshold, that personal allowance, that first sort of threshold kicks up, and then we'd all get a lot more pay in our pocket at the end of the month.
Okay, Holly, let's go back to Matthew. Matthew, you're still with us, aren't you? Matthew, is there anything you want to ask Holly about what she said? What's your reaction to what she said?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the budget is just lots of numbers crunching for me. It might seem boring, but it's the impact that it has on myself and many other carers around the country. So basically, one thing I'd like to ask Holly is, what sort of things should carers do to make sure that they can be well protected when things do go terribly wrong and they have to provide more unpaid care? What sort of things should really help carers to protect themselves?
Holly, you heard that, and it's something that we've reported on for months now, actually, on BBC. We hear from carers who say that they are concerned, they want more help and support, because it is a job, in addition to some people also either having to give up work or holding down a job at the same time.
I think the problem is for the 5 million people who are working carers and so are not eligible at the moment for the carers allowance. That means for people like Matthew, they are very reliant from things like today's budget on sort of increases to personal allowance or those cuts to national insurance. As hard as it is when budgets are so tight at the moment, as Matthew said, what can he do to protect himself if things go wrong? Interest rates are high at the moment, so shopping around, making sure any cash savings you are having are earning as much interest for you as you possibly can. But I don't expect to hear anything from the Chancellor today that will directly help or impact those 5 million working carers.
OK, well, let's see, of course. And Matthew, hopefully we'll speak to you later as well after the budget to get your reaction on what the Chancellor does actually say. Well, we've also got Joanne in Paynton on the line. Hi, Joanne. Welcome to BBC News. Just set out your concerns, your position ahead of the budget today and why you've chosen to come and speak to us about it.
So I think I'm here because I think affordable housing needs to be looked at. I live in a shared ownership and the rent side of my home has faced 2 increases since I moved in. I moved in about 14 months ago and it's the rent side of things has increased by 20%. I did an affordability assessment to be able to afford this property on an average salary. And then within 2 months of moving into the property, the Housing Association put up the rent from £319 to £345. And then last week I got another letter and it's gone up to £395. And that's alongside my mortgage. And this was supposed to be affordable housing.
Let me ask you about that, Holly. Joanne's saying this was supposed to be affordable housing, but it's almost like the sentence affordable and housing, they can't be spoken together at the moment. There are so many people who look at the interest rates, who look at how they are unable to save to get on that property ladder and are in despair.
You've mentioned interest rates there, and one thing from today's budget then people actually want is, weirdly, we want a really boring budget. If you think back to the mini budget of 2022 and the sort of fallout from that, markets...
That was a Liz Truss quasi-quarter one,
exactly, and that had a massive impact on sort of markets. We don't want any sense that inflation might creep back out of control. We don't want any sense that interest rates might go up again. So for many people actually who have got quite a high percentage of their outgoings dependent on interest rates, whether that's mortgage payments or debt they have, they'll actually be hoping for a pretty boring budget that won't jeopardise that fall in interest rates that we're currently seeing.
And of course it's worth reminding our viewers that it's not the government that sets interest rates, it's the Bank of England.
Indeed, who will respond to the sort of inflationary sort of pressures out there.
So we wouldn't hear that today in any case.
We wouldn't hear it today, but we don't want to see the Chancellor. This is why perhaps people are saying he's not going to cut income tax, because that might be seen as inflationary. One thing that is a sort of a bit of sort of hope, a beacon of hope for people like Joanne, is that cut in national insurance. So for someone, say, on £40,000 a year, we might see they have about £45 a month more in their pocket. So what we want to see is the proportion that she's paying as a mortgage, those interest rates to come down. We also would hope to see that cut in national insurance, which will mean more money in her pocket. And let's not forget as well that energy prices are going to come down in April. So again, there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. But as you say, housing remains a really crippling problem for many people in the UK. And again, will today's budget deliver as much to solve that problem? I'm not overly confident.
OK, thanks, Holly. Let's get Joanne back in. Joanne, I'd love to ask you what your thoughts are on what Holly's analysis of your situation is.
I think this 2% national insurance cut is going to be very, very good for people who are on higher incomes, but not for people who are on average incomes. So anybody below 40k, it's not going to be that much of a difference. And let's be honest, does the NHS really need those cuts at the moment?
Okay, thank you so much, Joanne. Thanks as well to Matthew and your brother, and hopefully we'll be back with all three of you after we've heard from the Chancellor to get your thoughts on what he says. And of course, thanks as well to you, Holly Mackay from Anything But Boring Money. And we will be back with you later as well,
Indeed.
hopefully to digest and analyse what we hear from the Chancellor. But for the moment, thank you very much.